Welcome, I'm Father John Powers, and I'm here again with Father Basil Pennington. Welcome, Basil.
Thank you, John.
I must say, it's delightful talking with someone about prayer forms, images of God, centering prayer. You mentioned in our last session having your spiritual father and being able to talk with him about your own prayer life. And that is an important element in our relationship with God, is to have someone else with whom we can share what's going on in our relationship with God.
It's a big help.
Learning experience, really.
Yes, yes.
And that's what this is for me, and I hope for many people who are watching.
Yeah, I hope so.
Centering prayer. Specifically, is there a definition for centering prayer?
No, the name kind of came out of Merton's writings, which I quoted an awful lot. Prayer is the key word there. And we kind of avoided calling it meditation or contemplation because there's a problem with those words today. In our kind of recent Catholic tradition, meditation is meant taking a text from the Gospels or something like that and pondering over, working over it to your mind. You kind of made a breakthrough and experienced the reality that was within it. And contemplation was kind of just being in the presence of reality. Well, in the modern English Hindu tradition, the two words mean exactly the opposite. Contemplation means you're using images and so on and working, and meditation means transcendental meditation, just being present to reality. And sad to say, it's perhaps commentary on us, is the fact that the Hindu terminology is more prevalent among young people than the Christian. But when we say prayer, we're emphasizing, whether it's meditation or contemplation, emphasizing the fact that, and this is the big difference from the Eastern things, is that it is an interpersonal relationship between the prayer and God. And it's an outreach in love. God speaks to us and we respond. And he speaks to us words of love and we respond in love. See? That's the essential thing. So centering prayer is a type of prayer, and it's a type of prayer where we just simply be to God. And we use the image of center, but you could use other images. It has been called traditionally the prayer of the heart, prayer of simple regard, prayer of presence, the prayer of the will.
But that sense of focusing?
Yeah, it's just being completely it's the first commandment. Loving the Lord your God with your whole mind, heart, soul, and strength. Just let everything go and just being to God. See? But we know God dwells within us. We know this from Scripture. We know this from the reality of the creation. And therefore, the easiest place to find God, the place where he always is with us, is in the depths of our own being, the center. So we just be to him there. But it's possible to center in other ways too.
I almost don't want to ask this next question, but how do you center? I have to ask it.
Yeah. Well, it's not so much how to be there, but how to stay there.
Okay.
See, the premise is very simple in that, well, first of all, it's important to get settled for prayer. And really, for most of us, the best way to pray is just to sit quietly in a relatively comfortable chair or position. There are wonderful positions that have come from the East, and they work for some people, they don't work for others. Right. But to get a settled position where the body can be relaxed and refreshed while you're resting in God. But getting a position and closing the eyes gently so that we can, just be free from things and be to the Lord. Coming to this, then the whole prayer is really just moving in faith and love. In faith, I know God dwells here.
Just mentioning that, I don't think most people would see that as a necessity or have been taught that as a necessary part of a prayer experience to physically become relaxed.
Yeah, well, if you're going to sit and enjoy somebody for a while, you kind of automatically, get kind of comfortable and relax. And sit
so a
back
lot of the images we're using are images of a relationship. If you're going to be with someone you love, you're going to listen.
Yeah.
You're going to share yourself. Here, you're going to sit comfortably with somebody you enjoy.
That's right. It's just kind of getting comfortable and being ready, so that you can just forget about yourself and just be with God. See, and then then you move in faith and love to this presence, And I'm using a spatial word there, move. It's gonna, and we kind of have to use some kind of words or images, but it's just simply being aware of God's presence and just turning to Him in love and just being to Him.
So this is not so much something that you learn how to do as a tremendously difficult discipline, as much as allowing it to be.
Yeah, right.
Allowing something that's almost natural to be.
Right. There are really kind of two basic kinds of prayer or meditation. One is the effortful, and the other is the effortless. The effortful is where you work at something till you kind of break through. In the East, you have like the Zen koan, the enigmatic statement that you keep working with your mind till you break through. Or in the Christian tradition, you have discursive meditation, where you apply your mind to a scene of the gospel and work to break through to the reality. But there's the effortless, where you just kind of let everything go and be to what is, which is God and yourself in God.
Almost allowing God to break through all the distractions.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's making space for God, really. And God's a perfect gentleman. He doesn't push his way in, and you have to open the door, so to speak. And so in this prayer, you just kind of let go of everything and you just be to God. Now you want to stay there with God. And so the second step, the second point of the prayer, is that you take a prayer word. Now what is this prayer word? This is a word that kind of expresses your completely being to God. Usually it's your favorite name for Him. When you say your favorite name for somebody, expresses your whole relationship. It could be John or Jack or Jay or something like that. And when you say that, and no other word just quite does it. Mom or mummy or ma or madre or ma. Or my mother used to call her father Papa. And of course, if I called my dad Papa, you'd think it was Kaka or something. He's Dad. See, so if we know the Lord, and this presumes we're knowing Him, if we're going to talk to Him, we want a love relationship with Him, we usually have a name for Him. It might be Father or a Lord or Jesus or God or love or Abba, I think was Jesus' prayer word. So you have this, and you just let this word,
a familiar
love
term.
word, really. Or even, it doesn't have to be, when two people are really making love to each other, they don't say anything, but they sometimes have just a sound which kind of intensifies their being to each other. So it's that sort of thing which really just keeps you really to the Lord. See? And it's just kind of there. It isn't repeated like an aspiration or a mantra or something, but just kind of there, this prayer word which keeps you centered to the Lord. See? And then the third point is that whenever you become aware of anything else during your prayer time, you just use that prayer word to come back to the Lord. So, you'll be sitting there, just quietly enjoying it, being with the Lord. And all of a sudden, you're thinking about what you had for lunch or what you have to do tomorrow or something like that, or you hear a noise. Yeah. And so at that point, as soon as you become aware of that, you just gently, with the prayer word, turn back to the Lord. Be back with Him. And that's the whole thing. It's as simple as that. And at the end, we suggest not just ending abruptly, but quietly turning to some kind of interior vocal prayer. And especially Our Father, the prayer Jesus taught us. And we just quietly pray that within and let it open out. So
it sounds so simple, but I have so many questions.
Very simple.
It's
so simple, it's difficult.
Right. One of those.
Yes. Simple, but not easy.
A number of times you've mentioned this love relationship. A loving couple, having terms, names you call each other, the embrace of love, your grandparents, making love, the example you just gave there. Is there an element of, just when you said that and described that example a moment ago, an element of romance when you're talking about relationship with God?
There can be, and it's nice when there is, but there isn't necessarily. And love isn't always, a thing of feelings and emotions. It's, if that's what you think it is, no marriage, no relationship's going to last very long. In the end, it's a choice. It comes out of realization that really my happiness, my fulfillment, my joy is being with you. That you are a part of my life. And that kind of choice. And knowing that, so one goes to the prayer times without any real feelings or emotions, just knowing I want to make space for God to come into my life. I want to experience Him. I want our relationship to grow. And I make that space. See? And I know if I make that space regularly, something opens out in the depths of me where that becomes my habitual stance. And then God can surprise me at any time, at any place, and begins really, in a sense, to be always there in everybody and everything, and that's when my joy is complete.
Is this just another form of what used to be called quietism, or another form of TM, transcendental meditation, where you're just relaxing and you're having a nice relaxing time and you feel refreshed and you go back to work?
Well, quietism and TM are quite different things in a way. If you're talking about historical quietism in our church, that was the aim of that was just really to quiet everything down. So you're still fully in yourself. There's no relationship there at all. I'm just concerned about quieting myself down. You know, and that's obviously you know, totally self-centered and egocentric and so on, and there's no prayer there at all. Now TM, it is a way of quieting down, but it's in order to therefore experience the transcendent. Now, for those with faith, they know that transcendent is God. And so for one who uses TM in the context of faith, it can be very real prayer, very real prayer. In the tradition it comes out of, where they don't have philosophic concept of person or any concept of the possibility of a personal relationship with the transcendent, you know, they can't understand it in the context of prayer. But a Christian using TM can use it in a prayerful way. And so you have to kind of understand what TM means for a particular person. But in its native context, it is not that interpersonal relationship, and therefore it's not prayer. It's dispositive to an experience of God, which will call forth love and a love relationship. And I think some of the masters I've met in TM, I believe, have what we would call a deep love relationship with God, a very true relationship with God, and are living a real life of prayer, but they wouldn't use those concepts at all. Right? But for us, it's very definitely not concerned about quieting me down. I'm not concerned about technique or method. All I'm concerned about is God. Okay? And I'm just using this method to help me make that space for God. And I use it only to the extent that I need it. Okay? So some days I will sit down and I'll just be to God, and I don't use my prayer word at all. And other days, because my mind is racing with all sorts of problems, things, I'll have to use my prayer word constantly to keep coming back to God. You know?
I know the Jesus prayer would be a similar tradition, a phrase that you use over and over. Some of the Eastern communities would give a specific word to a disciple, use this word. Is this a secret word? I know in some TM that this is a word you should not share with too many people, or it should be a personal.
Yeah, well, in some of these Eastern methods, the means of transcending is the sound tone, sound qualities. We in the West are not so sensitive to that as they are in the East, and it's a natural method for transcending. And so the particular word or phrase or meaningless sound that's given is very important. When you speak of the Jesus prayer, you have to find out what people mean. Now, the Jesus prayer, in its purest tradition, as you find it in Russia, Moldavia, the Holy Mountain, is the same as the centering prayer, really. But there has been other influences coming in there, some psychosomatic influences, and as you find the very developed forms in, say, Nicephorus of Jerusalem or Gregor Palamas, it's a rather complicated method. But men like Theophane the Recluse, the great spiritual father in Russia last century, said, no, leave that aside, just simply be to the Lord, see? Now, the Jesus prayer, though, originally comes from the same tradition as the centering prayer, what we call centering prayer. But the phrase that caught on, or really it's a double phrase from the Gospels, that caught on most in the East was, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. It's from those two scenes, the one, the blind man at Jericho cried out, you know, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy. And that publican in the temple who stood in the back and beat his breast and said, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. And it came together from that. But what happened as that prayer simplified, it always came down to just Jesus, and that's why it was called Jesus prayer. Now, when St. John Cassian went to the fathers to learn. He went to Abba Isaac, one of the holiest and oldest fathers of the desert, and he taught him this method, which he had learned as a young monk from an old father. So it's an oral tradition going right back to the very beginning. And the phrase that Abba Isaac gave to John Cassian was, "O God, come to my assistance. O Lord, make haste to help me." And that became very prevalent in the West as beginning our community prayer. But as it simplified down, it didn't come to just one word, so it became the God prayer or the Lord prayer. But as the author of The Cloud of Unknowing says to his disciple, a young man, 24 years old, an advocate who wanted to keep this kind of prayer in his life in the world, he told him, as he taught him this, he said, now choose a simple word, a single syllable word, but choose a word that's meaningful to you. See, so the prayer word is that word that expresses for you your whole relation to God. And I say usually it's a name, but not necessarily.
Will this word change over years or
Well,
a period of time?
Yes, it can. Ordinarily, you don't change. You're John, and I'll probably call you John as long as I know you. See, but there may be, our friendship may take a certain development, and I get a special nickname for you or something. Now, let me give you an example. I know a priest who was practicing this prayer about 30 years. When he first started, his prayer word was Jesus. His whole life was centered on Jesus. As that relationship with Jesus grew, he found he became so identified with Jesus, his prayer word became Father. He was praying with Christ, Father. And then he shared with me recently a very beautiful thing. He said one day he was praying, and all of a sudden he realized his prayer word had to change, and now had to be Pa. And he said his whole being just, he felt this was so irreverent, so familial, and everything, but he knew God was calling him to begin to use that as his prayer word, Pa. And that's been his prayer word since.
As a child, relating to a God. Now, I know that's in Scripture, Abba, Daddy. But I think a lot of people find that almost, you say irreverent, it's almost childish. Prayer is somehow much more intellectual than that, or much more mystical, or much more important than using a word like Pa when you're talking about God.
Yeah, and I would, coming from a rational point of view, that's what I would begin. But coming from the experiential point of view, I can see this man was just awed, because he knew God, and that the Almighty God, so called him to be his intimate child that he wanted to call him Pa.
And he didn't know God just up here in his mind. He knew God in the center.
And he knew God in his awesomeness, and this was just overwhelming for him.
What are some of the obstacles to this simple form of prayer?
Stuck in the head, just like you said, real, that's where we are. One of the things, is we touched on it before, is wanting to be right, And so instead of putting both eyes on God, loving God with a whole mind, whole heart, whole soul, we usually got one eye on ourselves to be sure we're doing it right, and we're marking up brownie points, On Judgment Day, we're going to be God's greatest ally. We're going to give him all the score, And this is an active prayer, like you do a meditation. You meditate upon, say, Jesus meeting 3 women on the path, and you think about that and ponder on it, get some good affections, and some good resolutions. And after your prayer's over, you say, gee, I had a good prayer today. Well, whether it's good or bad, one thing, you're watching yourself the whole time, and you could say that. See, but in this prayer, you finally turn both eyes on God, and you don't know what's going on. And that's hard for us to let go.
I think there's another difficulty there. If we had a third eye, we're probably watching how someone else is praying. To see if they might be doing it in a way that is supposedly better. Whether charismatic forms of prayer, whether sitting down or standing up or kneeling or laying down, or how you kneel, comparing ourselves to other forms so much, whether the rosary is better.
Yeah, sure. Instead, just letting all that go and just being to God. Simply being. See, it's such a pure prayer. And it's such a Christian prayer because we really have to die to self, to put our whole attention on God. And that's hard for us.
Just that phrase, dying to self. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I think there's
Well, all the time we want to reassure ourselves that I'm doing this right, I'm doing this good. I'm building up this ego. I'm worth something because I'm doing this, and I'm, this is the false self, the self we're creating. And that's what we got to die to. Or rather let it die, let it just disappear. It's just a phony big mirage which we've built up with help of other people, or defense against other people and so on over the years. And we just got to let that all go so that our true self can emerge. See, and this is what's happening. We're really being to God, and what happens is we discover our true self reflected back to us from God and come to know what magnificent people we are.
But this dying to self is not a negative perspective on,
oh, no,
on who you are.
It's getting rid of that phony stuff. It's the phony self. It's not the real self. You know, you can't die to the real self. The real self is alive in God, and it's eternal. It's magnificent. It's a share of the divine life and being in nature. See? When you get in touch with that, when you get in touch with how much God loves you, at every moment He's bringing you forth in love, then you're so free. You don't need that phony self anymore. You don't care what people say or think. If you don't appreciate me, well, you're just missing the boat, because God appreciates me. You just you know.
I can see that you enjoy that sentence you just said. You probably use it a number of times yourself. Huh?
Well, it's true. It's true.
But do you come to a deeper enjoyment of yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Of your own personality and your own gifts?
Sure, definitely. And you know your empowerment. I mean, I've got God with me. I can do anything.
Empowerment.
Yeah.
This form of prayer gives you something?
Sure. It leaves you free to be to everybody in love, and to step out and do things and not worry about what people are going to say or think, or whether you're going to fail or not fail. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is you got God, God got you, and we go on from there.
But others would say, this is the phony. I mean, this person in love who, you know, enjoys other people and who can be himself and isn't afraid and isn't concerned or comparing himself. There are so few people like that.
Yeah.
This is the phony.
And I'd say, brother, be honest with yourself. Isn't that where you'd like to be?
Other obstacles. Comparing yourself with others in their prayer form.
Yeah.
Comparing yourself, watching yourself.
One of the difficulties is, especially for people who've been practicing active prayer regularly, and moving into contemplative prayer, is this thing which you mentioned before, distractions. Now, see, at active prayer, you're using your mind to pray, right? You're thinking about things. So if you have other thoughts, it interrupts the prayer. And therefore, distractions are bad. You got to get rid of them and all this. Okay. In contemplative prayer, there's no such thing as distractions. See, because you're praying at another level. Okay? Now, the mind is still going. You know, every once in a while we get the idea, gee, if I was God, I would have, you know, shaped up this world a little better this way. One of my things used to be, well, if I had been God, I would have put in a few turn-off switches. So I went to prayer. I could turn off memory, turn off imagination, turn off hearing, and have great prayer. You know? Well, God's smarter than me. He didn't. So the interior TV keeps going. See? But our prayer is at a deeper level. See? And God is using those. See, Jesus said to us, come to me, all you who labor and heavily burdened, and I will refresh you. And Jesus was a good Jew. When he said you, he meant all of you. See, we talked before about posture, you know, relaxing before prayer so that he could refresh the body. The spirit's obviously refreshed as we're resting deeply in God. But the psyche is refreshed by this flow of thoughts and images. You know, it's like sleeping. When you're sleeping, you have a lot of dreams, whether you know it or not. And that is refreshing. And they found that if you prevent people from dreaming, they would soon become psychotic. See? Well, here too, while we're resting God, these images and things are taking away. And it's precisely the things that are causing the most tension in our life. They're the things that grab us and pull us out of the prayer. And when we become aware of them, and I underline that word aware, we just let them go, and with a prayer word, return to the depths, and they flow away with all the tensions.
So when we become aware of them, it's not a fight that we should then take up.
That's the worst thing we do. When I first started the prayer, I did that. I was using my prayer work like a club, you know, battering all these thoughts away. My spiritual friend said, now wait a second.
You just said the word over and over again. And these thoughts finally said, well, this is too much work.
Just let it flow away with the prayer word. Mother Teresa, St. Teresa of Avila, I love her. Great woman. She has a wonderful image, you know. When she was fairly elderly, for what those days were considered elderly, she was very busy running all over Spain doing what women do well, reforming the men. And she said one day, she said, you know, my life flows along, as it were, two great rivers. One river is constantly flowing into God, and the other into all these activities. But these two rivers are one river. I think it's a wonderful image. See, our life is flowing forth from God, and because we're men of love, our life is flowing back into God. That's the deep current. And on the surface, we got all these other things, you know, these busy little tugboats and heavily laden freighters and pleasure yachts and garbage scows, pollution. We got the whole works. Okay, and that's where we usually are. And in this prayer, what we do is we sink down in the depths and just go with the flow of that love. See? And then what happens is all of a sudden we find ourselves climbing on a freight boat to see what's there or something. And with a prayer where we just let go and sink back into the depths and go with the flow of love.
But the letting go,
Letting go.
that first act of letting go,
Yeah.
of consciously
That's the movement of
allowing
love
yourself,
to you, Lord.
that's where I think the greatest fear is.
Yeah, fear can come up. And I know I experienced it when I was first starting the prayer, and I've seen other people experience it. Because, you know, if you let go in love, it is risky. Because you never know what the beloved's going to do with you. You know? And yet, how else can you love?
And I think it's a fear that terrorizes some people. I mean,
Sure.
actually, they allow it to...
And what you need to do there is then go back to your Lectio and listen to the Lord and let him speak to you through the Scripture, especially the Gospel of St. John, the Last Supper, where he opens his heart. Chapters 14, 15, 16, 17. Just let him speak to that until you really, you know, are in touch with his love, and then you can let yourself go in that love.
Or perhaps when Christ himself was in prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane and did experience a fear of what confronted him,
Oh, sure.
and how he dealt with that, allowed it to be
Yeah,
in his
just,
life,
thy will be.
allowed that river to continue to flow,
Right.
even though it was going to flow somewhere where it was not going to be as pleasurable as before.
Yeah. Yeah, when you get in touch with that love, you trust your beloved, and you don't worry about where it's going.
Just in 30 seconds in this session, we'll continue in the next session, but how has this changed you as a man?
Oh, gee, it's filled my life, made me so free and so joyful. All those fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, they just flow, you know. Well, I used to be a very uptight person. Now I'm completely free and happy and love
more
everybody,
relaxed.
and it's a tremendous joy I just enjoy people immensely. I enjoy everything, absolutely everything. Yeah.
Well, we enjoyed being with you, and we
Okay.
have one more session to
Great.
continue our discussion about centering prayer.